Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I want to ramble on for a bit about the changes in Year 6, Season 3, or TU23 if we were to go by title updates still. As we got a bunch of patch notes, and in those patch notes, we had a few weapon changes and a few other minor changes that I kind of want to discuss and kind of what they mean for us. But then there was also a bunch of changes that weren't listed at all. Most of them good, so it's good to highlight them maybe here. Also, a bunch of miscellaneous trivia stuff that we'll go over, as we did get a few things that interact in interesting ways with each other. So this video will mostly be just us jumping between a bunch of different things, not per se connected, except that they all happened because of this season. So yeah, let's go get started with the weapon changes. And let's start out with discussing some of the minor weapon changes. As yeah, for instance, the Lexington got touched up a little bit. Its base went down by a tiny amount. But as well, actually, the Dark Winter got brought back in line as it wasn't lining up with its named weapon. But for instance, that one is an unlisted change. For that as well, we'll be using the patch notes. I'll link those in the description below, but they haven't actually put out patch notes in the form of the Trello boards that they would normally do, where also they would list a ton of miscellaneous stuff. This one, they put it out as kind of like an article form. This used to always be there as well and kind of highlight the new things. The new things would be in this article, and then the full patch notes would be the full patch notes. I wouldn't consider these the full patch notes. They contain a lot, but not everything. And actually, a bunch of the things that are unlisted are actually pretty welcome. So it's kind of, they should list those here as well. We'll go through all of those in the future. But starting out here, they did put out some weapon tables again, and excluding shotguns and MMRs, basically all weapon categories have had a better reload speed, so faster reload speeds for some of the weapons. And as well with that, there is basically one listed nerf here in the Lexington, one unlisted nerf in the form of Dark Winter, and then also a bunch of 3 buffs to bases of weapons. Overall, the reload speeds, of course, they are overall a buff. And what they've mostly done is the weapons that were already high on the burst table, basically, they didn't get much in the form of a better reload speed. But a lot of the weapons that were lower on the burst and actually already a little bit high on the sustain, they've got an even better sustain. Does that make a meaningful difference? Not per se, but on a lot of weapons, the reload speed is definitely welcome, especially some of the exotics. And yeah, what we're going to use, of course, to compare that a little bit with is the burst and sustain tables that I keep and maintain. These I'll link to the main folder here, and yeah, the main file, the 00 burst, sustain, and damage per mag folder or file has been updated already on the first day. Yeah, right away. The on-build ones that are there haven't been yet. I will do that actually, but it will take a little bit, of course, as it always does, to get all of that work in there. And they will list if they are TU23 updated. The main file already is. If we go in there and actually look at the Lexington, let's zoom in actually a little bit so it's better readable. The Lexington used to be the top of this table. Now it's actually a little bit below the F2000, but that's also a little bit misleading because we know when we look at it on build, because of this -1 mod on the F2000 and even the Honey Badger here, they move down quite a bit because that -1 mod means that they have 5 crit chance or 10 crit damage less, and that does make a big difference. So the Lexington, well, the FAMAS actually used to be the top of the list, even before the Lexington came in. The Lexington came in, it became the top of the list of the burst tables, especially on build as a weapon. And this Lexington now being 1.15% worse off than it used to be. That's the difference in burst or in the base damage nowadays. So they took that down by that amount. Doesn't make enough of a difference for it to be behind the FAMAS. And of course, it is much better handling than the FAMAS. And also it has a long rail, which for instance, for this season, for the linked laser pointer does make a difference because the linked laser pointer is actually one of the standout tools of this season. So the FAMAS is still firmly in second place. The Lexington is still the best overall. F2000 and such, as I've seen some people go like, F2000 is not better than it. No, because we know when we put it on build that the F2000 kind of lands way behind the FAMAS and even the fall. The fall as well is kind of the way to measure this as well, because one of the things is that, for instance, yeah, the FAMAS is kind of high on the burst, but then if we go to the sustain table, it is firmly at the bottom. The fall is a little bit higher on the sustain, but then it is a little bit behind the fall, but behind the FAMAS here, of course. The thing is, though, that in both burst and sustain, the Lexington is much higher than both. So, for instance, even the fall, that is, you know, a little bit more sustain oriented, isn't higher than it. And that's basically the case. All of the weapons that are pretty high in burst are pretty bad in sustain, and the other way around. The Lexington is firmly pretty high in burst and kind of in the middle of the pack with sustain, making it overall the top pick. If we go to rifles next, as we can discuss that one in here as well, is that the UIC, well, 3 weapons got a buff, the lightweight M4 for around 3%-ish, the Resolute for around 3%-ish, and the UIC for around 4% in the end. In the PTS, this was stated or listed as a 13-ish% buff to it. Basically, it did have that buff. It wasn't just listed as. In the end, it only got 4%. And yeah, because of that, it is still firmly at the end of the burst DPS tables. It has moved up, of course. It has been made basically a 4% better with a better burst. And also now its sustain as well is gotten much better because a lot of the rifles have gotten better reload speeds. Overall, the UIC is definitely a weapon in the past even that you could use. It is much more of a comfortable weapon, and especially if you're not doing anything that requires tryharding. If you're, of course, like doing an incursion or a raid or something like that, you want to be at your best. But honestly, if you're just going around and doing some activities or such, a big fluffy sweater that, you know, is basically all the way torn up and stuff, and you wouldn't wear it outside to a fancy dress party, that's fine for those days where you're just sitting on the couch and just, you know, watching some movies. It's kind of the same here. It is well worth using, but because of its handling and its ammo consumption being pretty low. So that is still a valuable thing for the UIC. But yeah, it was going to land if it got that 13% just below the Mark 17, and yeah, that was a bit much for it. Although I think in the end I would have preferred it gotten around 7 or 8%, kind of between the two, and then it would be, if it was closer to the pack, it would be much more of a easy pick, because overall now it is still a pick if you're going for comfort. Lastly, for the Dark Winter, actually I made a separate spreadsheet here. This standard multi-calculator. We're comparing 2 different sets here actually. The green ones here is with killer active. The blue ones here is with killer inactive, because we kind of want to know both. What the Dark Winter used to have is the stats when TU22 happened, and a lot of the rifle or SMGs actually got moved down a little bit in the whole category as a whole, kind of got moved down a little bit. In that the Dark Winter, or specifically the Vector 45, did get actually a little bit of reductions. But then the Dark Winter, as a named item, actually didn't get those reductions. And that was kind of weird, because normally a named weapon has to be the same stats as the weapon it's based on. That's kind of handy. But it wasn't that for that whole season. Now it did get fixed up to be the same stats. So in last season, the Dark Winter was the clear pick. If you were going for killer anyway, you would go Dark Winter, because it was already as a base weapon kind of better than the Tac Vector, just because of its stats, because it had so much of a higher base, and actually a much better reload than it has now. And then if you were picking anything else, you would go with the Tac Vector. Now as it stands, we're comparing everything here, so there's 2 segments being compared. This one is comparing to the Tac Vector here at the top with killer, and then the other one here. I've copied this from a different table. That's also why it's not just the Vector 45 but we can kind of see that when we have killer active here on a normal striker, just general striker setup, we could have gone with Hunter's Fury, but the differences won't be that large. We do gain there more from killer, so you would gain more from that, from the difference basically, because the crit is lower. But what we see here is that once killer is procced, actually, The attack vector, with its much smaller killer, basically 70% instead of the 90%, is still actually ahead on burst and sustain, and by in the sustain and a little bit more than the Dark Winter. So overall, I would say it is now time to go back to attack vectors with killer, especially because here, of course, we're gaining 70 versus 90. That means that especially when killer isn't active, and that is the second set, also again then comparing all of these grayer numbers against the attack vector, we see that the vector 45, which is just the Dark Winter here then as well, is actually, yeah, quite a bit behind. So when killer is not activated, it is quite a bit ahead, and then because of the bigger killer on Dark Winter, it almost catches up, but not totally. And that means that, yeah, I would go attack vector over Dark Winter nowadays, especially as well. This is at 0 headshot, and of course, headshot being additive to the same pool as crit damage. If we actually put this at 100% headshot, the only thing that actually will in percentages change, because all of the other ones are already the same killer, basically, so it doesn't change for them. But now, on headshots especially as well, we're losing kind of 2% here, and now a little bit more also in the sustain end, because that killer, of course, is giving more crit damage. So the pool of crit damage plus headshot is actually, you know, less effective because of that, giving more diminishing returns. And we see that return here as well. So overall, I would say the Dark Winter is still well worth grabbing if that is what you have, because the thing is still, Dark Winter comes with a perfect talent. If you get one from a named cache, or it comes up on the countdown vendor, or you get it as a drop, or you have it in some way, you just need to put detox on it. You don't have to find, you know, a free talentable one, or one that already comes with killer to put detox on it or something. It is much easier to overall get a Dark Winter than it is to get specifically attack vector that you can have with killer. So if you have one, it is also not that far behind that it's completely unusable, because it still also has, yeah, a little bit more mag size, even though its reload is so much worse that, yeah, the sustain kind of becomes worse, but its damage per mag will be a little bit higher. But yeah, overall, I'm going to exchange any Dark Winter that I have with attack vectors, because I have that opportunity. Yeah, let's go on to the next ones. Next up, one of the unlisted changes that they made is that pummel no longer works with Oxy. This was used, and I would maybe even say abused, in many ways, as equipping a Tsunami, for instance, or any pummel, but Tsunami gave it for you on 2 kills. If you used an Oxy, in this case, or actually even Firecam worked with it as well, as long as you got 2 kills, it would refill your magazine of your cam launcher, which was a little bit much, as you could infinitely put out Oxys. And this was, of course, also getting abused in combination with Kenley to kind of, yeah, do some grinding. And even in other places, because I know of a few other places that similar exploitations can be done, and I will call them exploits. Yeah, that was a bit much, and I'm kind of happy it is gone. Of note, though, it is... My speculation was that they were going to just remove any talent affecting the Oxy or the Chem or such. That isn't the case. And one thing we can still do, for instance, the Glory Days with its stability bonuses still does actually apply to the Oxy. So, for instance, if I were to go with whatever other weapon I have here, we can see that there is a noticeable sway when I aim it out. We can see it swaying to and fro, and especially if we kind of put it aligned to something, we can see it overlapping to it. If we go now with our Glory Days and have that stability, it is close to perfectly stable. It is, of course, still moving a little bit from left to right, because stability is only the vertical recoil also in this case. But yeah, it is very noticeable that is very big boon to us. Then as well, Chatterbox still works as well, as if we get some Chatterbox stacks as we have here. If we normally fire chems, let's say, it's not that fast, because if I swap away from it, I can't. Even if I'm spam clicking, this is kind of the speed that we go at. If we now create a Chatterbox stack, and let's maybe put this weapon, this enemy and that enemy also close enough that they will trigger with this. We'll reload, get 4 stacks there, for instance, and then we can fire much faster, just literally rate of fire. So they did actually change the pummel, but nothing else. And yeah, I was kind of needed because, yeah, we have talents like skilled and calculated and stuff that can still be kind of used to have similar effects, but not to the degree that pummel could. And I'm happy to see it gone, actually. That's also why I didn't include it in, for instance, some of the recent shorts or in things and stuff where we kind of discussed specifically things applying to the Oxy or chems in general. Next up, keeping at the range. And actually, with the Oxy build, I wanted to kind of give my opinion on the journey, and also that it can be mostly done at the range if you hadn't figured that out yet. Although I feel so many people have already discussed this that kind of have to be living in Keener's jail cell to have not heard. But is this kind of a good thing overall? I would say no. I would prefer it if it wasn't an option, because it is tedious, even though I myself did use it, so I am a hypocrite. But I would rather not have that option, and then grinding this out would take a little bit, but none of it is actually as bad as last season. Not that per se, actually, last season I found it terrible or anything. I did do the journey 3 times on 3 accounts and didn't really struggle too much. You did need to grind at points, especially on journey 7, you basically had to grind one of the tasks with some of the modifiers. For most, that would have been that getting those tanks at close range with impatient. But that was, well, that was just a half-hour grind, which actually here, if we're grinding out the entire thing, because here, except for in Journey 3, well, Journey 1 and 2 as well have a bunch of stuff that you couldn't just do at the range. Journey 3 has just these 3 hostile ones that you can't do at range. But then after that, actually, basically everything can be done at the range. And you do so just by doing the thing that it asks. And there's a lot of waiting in it because you need to trigger some of the things that are of cooldowns and such, like activating Vendetta over and over again and trying to get those skills in with it. And it's kind of tedious. I, in my case, kind of did it in the background. I was doing work stuff and actually had the game running on my laptop with a controller, and just once in a while sending a chem and such, getting blacklisted enemies, letting some spawn, and then triggering that and just murdering them. I'm not per se also against it, because I also can see the argument that it lets you just get it done, get it out of the way, which kind of I did as well on this account, partially as well, as I wanted to have the modifiers to discuss them. I wanted to also kind of point out here that, yeah, actually this XP that we get, not the season XP part, but the normal XP part is actually affected by directives. So if you turn on, you can easily turn on 4 directives because you don't per se need your ammo and such. Although if you're doing the Vendetta specifically one, yeah, you need your main weapon and your pistol. But for a lot of the rest of it, you're not using your weapons really at all. So you could have 4 directives on and actually get a little bit more normal XP out of this. And you can just see the numbers as well. You just turn on your directives, you see that this number with 4 directives, because you can't have Scavenger skills on, because most of it you'll be doing with skills. You can't have that on, but then, yeah, the rest can be on, and you get 600k XP out of this, and that is actually a bunch of season or a bunch of caches out of that, and SHG levels, of course. Then as well, it is important to know that the journey actually, for now at least, is per character. So in last season, the journey was account wide. That seems to also be their intention, because there's already on the Trello board a note indicating that they kind of want to change that, and it's stated for the very first patch of the season, basically. So likely this will get altered, but for now you can do the journey on multiple characters, and the benefit of that is that the journey, as you go through it, gives a lot of season levels. So if you're gunning for season level 100, which I myself also kind of wanted to get out of the way a little bit, just to have the cosmetics and kind of discuss them and such, doing it on, I did it basically on 2 characters, and then on other 2 characters, I did journey 1 and 2, which is pretty quick to get out of the way. And that put me like at 90 something, and then I did a priority objective or 2 and got it done. Now, I wouldn't recommend grinding it that way. I wouldn't even recommend actually sitting at the range and very boringly sitting here and just oxying stuff out or mortaring them for explosive kills or stuff like that. But it is an option, and honestly, if you want to do it, that is up to you. Do consider that, yeah, it is a little bit tedious. It'll take 4 or 5 hours-ish to get done maybe, and that is, you know, that's like a session or two. You could be also running around and just leaving it because it is a seasonal journey. We idiots like me getting it done in a day or two, getting both the journey all the way done and then also the season pass all the way done. Not per se the way that, you know, do as I say, not as I do, basically. But yeah, I did want to address it and also, yeah, talk about directives affecting this so you can get a little bit of XP out of it. And yeah, doing the journey multiple times can be one of the best ways to get season done if you just want to get it done. Next up, I want to discuss one of the welcome changes, actually, that was in the patch notes as well. And that is that if we go here, that scavenger points have been altered. They have basically overall buffed them, have them increased, and e-credits hasn't gone up by a lot. The green resources have basically doubled from 50 to 100, and then the blue resources have gone from 25 to 75, tripled even. And printer filament also has gotten a 50% increase basically by going from 10 to 15, and that's actually one of the bigger changes, as HT calibrations and field recons have actually stayed at the same amount. And these changes are actually pretty welcome, because one of the things we used to do quite a bit, if you wanted to use printer filaments for getting things proficient, as overall that is one of the better ways, although buying credits and then actually buying items, the named items and such, especially for weapons and named items, if you buy 20 of them and donate them, that'll be proficient for those. So that is the first one to kind of use. But then as well, instead of just buying printer filaments directly back when it was 10, you could actually buy e-credits with your watch points. And if you then went and bought skills from here, just skill mods, and actually one of the tips that you could have used back then, although not very relevant anymore, if you turned on this auto deconstruct skill mods to on, any duplicates will get this deconstructed basically. So what that means is that you would just buy this, and the second one up until the how many at one you bought, all of those would automatically get deconstructed, which was quite nice of a change when that came in. But buying this way and deconstructing actually was gained you around like 30 to 40% extra from your watch points to printer filaments instead of buying them from the watch. Now, of course, the e-credits got a little bit of a buff, but the printer filaments got much more big of a buff from that 10 to 15. And that means that it is no longer really needed to buy e-credits and do it that way and deconstruct those mods, as the printer filaments now, if you buy these, with some of the cheaper mods, if you find some of them even cheaper than what is maybe available this week, now it's just under 2% of an increase to buy the e-credits and then sit at the vendor. And of course, just generally we would just macro that, but for our console brethren, that is not really an option. But obviously you could at least macro that buying and kind of just leave it running. And that is no longer really needed, because while it is still technically better, in practice, just that extra time that requires is just not worth it anymore. So yeah, now we can just directly buy printer filament, taking out some tedium, which I'm all for. So now we would just buy them in batches of 50 here and use that to go and use for proficiency, because that's the thing for it, of course. This also means that where it used to be 300 watch points for one item to go from 0 to 10, because you needed 3,000 printer filaments for that. Now that is 200 per item, and that is quite an increase, of course, as we get to do, where we used to do 2 items, we can now do 3 items. One of the things that this season doesn't seem to have, which I'm hoping they add in maybe, is that, yeah, there isn't an expertise XP event. We did have one at the end of last season. The combination of those two things together would mean that you just need as the last time it was a double XP event, even though they advertised it as a 3 times, it was a double XP for proficiency. For the printer filaments, that would mean you need 100 per item. And especially, of course, with the 5 times XPs and such, giving up to 1,000 levels, kind of expecting that this season again as well. You could, at least in this season, you can already, just with XP events, get 2,000 levels worth added to your SHT level. So yeah, expertise will have been made a lot easier, and that's a good thing. Although I wish they would still address and maybe just half, even maybe the requirements per item, because this is still a grind. It is very much, if you're at 27 and going to 28, which is the new number for this season, it isn't too horrendous, but starting out anew and trying to go for that high number, it still kind of hurts, but now it hurts 50% less, basically, especially if you're doing it with watch alts, which later on, yeah, generally is the way to go. And once you're of 2000 SHT plus, it is actually, in time spent, it is the faster way than trying to proficiency some of the items. Although, yeah, you should actually just proficiency basically everything up to DZ names and exotics and skills, and then maybe use those printer filaments just for those. So yeah, a little bit of a buff to getting there, but yeah, it's still kind of annoying that overall the best way to get proficiency and expertise level up is watch alting, which is not actually using the items but kind of going around. But a welcome change nonetheless. Next up, another unlisted change in this case. And a very welcome one. Not everybody will have noticed, especially if you don't have alts, but the progression system, basically the collectible, the entire tab, has actually been made account-wide. And this is a welcome change because last season, especially the scouts, was an issue, because if you had any of the scouts done on alternate characters, because for instance, in my case, I very much like to have all of the comms on my first character. On the other ones, I don't care that much about everything. But yeah, I've gone out of my way to have all of the collectibles there. And as well, actually, I had one collectible that was an issue, which we'll discuss in a minute. But that also got fixed by this. But for instance, here, this is my second character. So usually I do the manhunts on my main character because, yeah, that's where I collect the comms. But from now on, it doesn't matter per se which character you do it on, because yeah, this is all account wide. So I haven't done the manhunt on this character, but this character does have the scouts comm here, and as well with all of the other ones. And it's not just the comms, it is all of the other things. As on this character, I definitely was missing some of the stuff. This also means that actually from now on, the snitch cards is going to be account wide as well. I'm curious to see how that will affect some of the things as issues that would be sometimes caused by things spawning. I'm hoping they also have made the checklist, basically, that the game kind of keeps in the background, that they have made that one also account-wide, but we'll see. Some testing is needed there still, but the downside of it is as well, sometimes we would use comms, especially, for instance, the bunch of comms in and around campus that would quite often lead to having a collectible subset, because there was a collectible subset there. You could use that to get actually close to third of a level from just campus very quickly. And that is, of course, for instance, no longer available. But that is a minor thing to give up for this to kind of help us out. And yeah, with the comms being account-wide now, for instance, as well, all of my characters have the descent comms, which kind of looks cool. But one of the issues that I had actually is that in Incursion, not on this character specifically, but a lot of people had this one, and that is the confirm comm, which is this one. Sometimes some characters would be missing this. So for instance, on 2 of my 4 characters, I actually had this comm, but not actually on the character that I cared about. And this kind of fixed that because, yeah, it actually merged them all. It is just, yeah. If any character gets the comm, all of them have it. And yeah, that kind of fixed that issue for me, which is kind of nice as well. Because now on that character, yeah, I'm no longer missing that one incursion comm that I was missing for all that time. And yeah, it wasn't that I was unaware of how to get it or anything. It was just that it wouldn't drop. It's supposed to drop from right when you hit all 4 valves, but it can bug out in certain ways, and I found that out the hard way. And that basically means that if you have all of the comms, it's just going to be the current manhunt that will get in the way, as yet descent as well. We have reached this week the point where 90 out of 90 comms is here. We even got the collectible subset complete pop up, so I'm curious to see if they maybe add some in the future. I'll still likely keep a weekly rotation of Descent in my repertoire because I do like Descent, so we'll be going in there much more. But yeah, this unlisted change is actually very welcome, and I was very happy to see it. Even though it has some minor downsides, for instance, watch halting and stuff, it is so minor that the benefits outweigh the downsides by quite a lot. And yeah, I'm very happy that they did this. Making this account wide has made it a lot easier to kind of go for it. And it being a merge as well means that it solves a few problems like that confirm mod, or as well if some people have other mod, because there are some other comms that I do know sometimes bug out, and same as well for some of the notes from some of the season ones from manhunts. That has also fixed that, as some people couldn't get all of the comms on all of the characters because of past seasons. You needed sometimes to have the notes and such. So yeah, a welcome change. Next up, I want to briefly discuss the Exodus gloves. As in the final form that it came into the game, it isn't as with the PTS. In the PTS, it was coming with a blue core and a hazard protection, and I don't remember exactly if it was crit chance or crit damage, but yeah, one of those. It kind of looked dead on arrival because it would cost too much to put into a build. Now, the final version, and they changed this, and I think it's a really good change. They changed it to be weapon damage, crit chance, crit damage, a full-on red piece. So versus other things that we could have, so for instance in this build, Striker Obliterate, we would have a Coyote. Generally, if there's enough Coyotes, we would have an Gruppo piece there, or a Fenris piece. Either or could work really well here. So what we're giving up is either Coyote bonuses, basically, but we could of course receive those from other players. But even then, if we're doing that versus a Gruppo, for instance, where we could have a brand bonus and instead of this smoke screen. Now, on that same spreadsheet that we were kind of looking at earlier, the one with the vectors, I've added in a second one here, and that one contains here that build basically if we went Coyote, if we went Exodus, or if we went Gruppo. Now, the Coyote, of course, has a 15 to 25 and a 0 to 15 version here. For the Exodus and the Gruppo, I've done both a 57 and a 60 crit chance version. We're kind of considering this solo. If you're already getting Coyote from other members of the team, then yeah, you would basically just be losing. The Gruppo would be the option, of course, if you're not already going Coyote. But here, kind of considering it solo, we could go 57, we could go 60. The 60, of course, is going to be lower damage-wise. We have to put in a mod for 6. We're flipping a crit damage for that. We're not going to gain that much out of it. But then, of course, yeah, the 60 does have some value when you're running talents that are triggering off of crit chance, like Killer. Going from 57 to 60 is a little bit of a difference for Killer triggers. So we have both here. We can kind of discuss both. We'll mostly be discussing them in this 57 form. So everything is comparing to this top slot, which is the Coyote at 15 to 25. This is what the build's kind of set up for, because normally there's 51 and then 51, 141 is its crit chance, crit damage with the Coyote. Here, of course, with the Coyote getting the +10, it is the top slot. Everything else is kind of comparing to it. The Exodus, we kind of lose around 4% versus the Coyote. Now, versus the Gruppo, it's a little bit less, 3-ish%. Now, of course, if this was getting Coyote from somebody else, this would be a little bit more than that, 3.5-ish%. The thing is here as well, this is at 100% headshot. If we actually remove that, because of course we're gaining more from crit damage, actually when when we're not headshotting, basically, because those go into the same pool. At 0% headshot, it is a much bigger difference because, of course, we're gaining more from the crit. It isn't also coming from headshot there a little bit as well. So there, now it is basically a 5.5% difference. If we kind of put that to that 20% that I generally use for it, we're kind of around the 5% mark. So we give up 5% for that utility of the glove. Is that worth it? And I would say it kind of is, because the effect that we get from it when we trigger the smoke bomb and go poof, although actually it didn't there, but that's not important. When we get that, we basically are adding in, if you're familiar with the health gate or the one-shot protection, we're basically adding another health gate, although in this case specifically armor gate. So instead now, before getting downed, instead of just it being you get hit in your armor and you go down your health, and now you hit your health gate, and now the health gate goes away, and then you get downed and you use a hive. Now we have an extra one in there because we have the armor gate first, but this is actually only really if you're getting chip damaged, because of course if a big hit like a grenade or a sniper hits you, it's gonna go through the armor gate, basically triggering this, giving you some respite as well, because enemies will stop targeting you for 3 seconds, but it is still gonna go and hit your health gate. But if you're just getting chip damaged by something, it's actually gonna hit that armor gate basically of this, then that's going to fall away after 3 seconds. Now you still have your health gate after it. That then drops after 2 seconds. And then you can be killed. And that is actually pretty valuable, because this is for the price, for the 5% that we gain, that we lose here. We gain actually a pretty strong survivability talent. And it's also coming off of cooldown quite often. So this is pretty powerful. And also whenever it triggers, you actually go out of combat. Now that can even be used to swap out loadouts if you're smart about it, very quickly in those 2 seconds. Well, 3 seconds, but then 2 seconds of it, you're actually out of combat, because the game kind of takes a second to realize that you're out of combat. The other thing is that because you're out of combat, you gain basically half an armor bar back, as long as no regen isn't on, because you're out of combat, so you're regenning your armor. And that's actually pretty potent, because it's kind of half of an unbreakable on there. And enemies as well. In those 3 seconds, they just don't target you at all. So if you're getting armor broken by something, you have 2 seconds of your DPS worth basically to kind of just burn them down, because they're not going to be targeting you as long as you're already kind of close to cover, that you're kind of safe if you need to go into that cover right after. But you can just unload on an enemy for 2 seconds without them shooting back, for certain. And that is actually really powerful. I've been quite enjoying running this around, and I think actually if you're running red builds and just generally, you know, that's the playstyle you're going for, this is really a good pick, especially as well if you're, for instance, running glass high ends, because the crit chance or the loss of swapping this in for contractors or something isn't a big loss, because yeah, now that has crit chance, crit damage, and is a red core in there as well, it's actually less of a loss overall. But yeah, overall, this is a pretty powerful tool. I've been enjoying it quite a lot. Do try it out when you get it. It is not too deep in the season track, and yeah, this is going to be one of the easier things to proficiency, because you can just run it in whatever red builds. And I think that once, especially players that kind of like running full reds a lot, will realize how powerful already. They should already realize how powerful a health gate is. Adding an armor gate on top, basically what this is, actually pretty good. Next one I want to touch up on, as I've seen already several people kind of talking about this and getting it wrong. It is that movement speed seems to just be capped at 20%. Now, of course, with this season's main modifier, we get to have 20% movement speed there. And I've already seen some people discussing it as if it can be stacked, because, for instance, here, the Lady Death, of course, has 20%. Also, Acosta knee pads can give us some movement speed. But when we get a kill, for instance, here, for 20 seconds, when I run, we can see that I'm a zooming, and I'm a zooming about the same speed as, yeah, we're now kind of accustomed to with Rogue Momentum. And yeah, when it falls away, we go back to our normal speed, which, if you're kind of used to the game, it is very obvious when you do have a speed buff and when you don't. And yeah, us zooming around, and then it falls away. The icon is on the buff bar, so it goes away now, and then it becomes a lot slower. Now, a simple test, of course, is just to get this buff and then overdrive. And yeah, we're not running any faster. We have both of the buffs up. Now, the buff from Lady Death is going to fall away. And you'll notice that I'm running the same speed because, yeah, the modifier takes way longer to decay. But yeah, if I get a kill again here and we kind of keep running, it's the same speed. And especially the change in speed would be very noticeable because that would happen now. And yeah, it isn't. It is exactly the same speed because we're still in that 4th tier. So yeah, movement speed capped at 20% overall, it seemed. That text on the Acosta, it seems that is not just specific to the Acosta knee pads. That is very much just the general cap. And yeah, 20% is our max, so there is no point in stacking Lady Death with the modifier for any real reason. The Lady Death, of course, not very a good pick. If it was a better pick, maybe we could just take it for damage. But yeah, don't take it for its running speed. You can't exceed that 20%. We have a governor on here, and we're limited to 120% of our movement speed at most, and no way around that, at least not to my knowledge. And lastly, although likely also least, I kind of wanted to discuss the interaction between Provocator and the Oxpecker. The Oxpecker, of course, the new SMG of the season. One of the things that it does, alongside of repairing your shield and such, but the part we're kind of concerned here with is that while having a shield deployed, lose shield health at a rate of 10% per second. And I was very curious, actually, if this was going to interact with Provocator, because normally if it's a talent-based one, you would just expect this to just remove 10%, not be really interacting with anything else. But it turns out actually that with the Provocator, it does. So here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 ticks for it to break. And if you're wondering why it's 13 as well and not just 10, as you would kind of expect, and that's because the shield, of course, has active regen going on it. I've also turned off the modifier here so that I don't accidentally have fortified shield on, because that will basically double the active regen. This here being now at the moment an 0 tier shield, so as weak as it gets, also to keep those numbers down a little bit. Although I do have on this, I do have a little bit of expertise, so yeah, it's gaining from that. But now if we put on the Provocator, we had 13 ticks a second ago. Now if we turn it on, although actually it's not fully healed up, let's actually let it fully charge, because of course otherwise it wouldn't be a fair comparison. And once it's all the way up there, oh, we're holding the wrong weapon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and then 18. Yeah, so the Provocator is affecting that, and just an interesting interaction. The Provocator by itself is not worth running alongside of this because it is just, you know, we're giving up too much. When we were discussing the Exodus, we're kind of discussing it being 5%. This is so much more than that, of course, if you were to run it, because you're giving up a chest talent, you're giving up 2 stats, a red core, if you're kind of running it on a red build. If they were to change this to maybe be at least maybe blue core, crit chance, crit damage, or red core even, this could be actually an interesting interaction. You still wouldn't be worth it because you're giving up way too much. You're already giving up a damage talent for a utility talent on the Oxpecker. You would be giving up a chest talent on top of that. Maybe if there was a little bit of damage component from this, maybe as long as you take damage, you know, whenever you take damage, you gain 10% damage buff for like that the next second or something like that. That could even make it an interaction with the Oxpecker that likely could trigger it, and then you have actually a combination that could get you a decent, well, not decent damage buff, but well, at least I wouldn't per se want to make this competitive, but at least usable. But yeah, for as it stands now, I just some trivia, and I was just interested. One of the first things I thought about this was just like, oh, does it interact with the Oxpecker next season? And yeah, turns out that it does. And actually, I had my money on no, because generally when it is a talent like this, it just takes away at the rate that it says. But yeah, let's go on and conclude this video. And to conclude this video, there's always a lot of unlisted changes, and I wish Massive would be better about that and not put things into the game basically that aren't in the patch notes. Because especially, yeah, there's a little bit of conversation going around the Oxy changes, the Oxy pummel changes, and the Dark Winter changes as being kind of hidden changes. And while they are kind of, they were also somewhat discussed. The Oxy changes were kind of discussed in the live stream. The Dark Winter changes were kind of expected, as yeah, the Dark Winter having different stats than its base weapon was just obviously a mistake. Oxy pummel was, as I've seen some people call it, like this being an anti-fun tactic. Oxy pummel was an anti-balance tactic. So honestly, I am very much in favor of that disappearing, and actually I'm happy that other things like Chatterbox and Glory Days and such still apply to it. There are still tactics you can use to get a lot of Oxys out, and people will discover that, although they're obvious in skilled and calculated and stuff like that. But now it has to come at a damage cost, which the last one didn't, and also was one charge at a time instead of all your charges at once. So Pummel Oxy was definitely on the chopping block, and that's also why I was not discussing it outright. I was hinting at it, for instance, in things and stuff with showing the chems and stuff. And yeah, some of the other changes, especially I wanted to discuss the weapon changes and kind of say that the DPS tables have, of course, been updated. And yeah, we'll actually update the on-build ones in the future, but they'll get their own video. This one was just, I wanted to discuss a ton of things, and I wanted to throw them all in here and kind of give my opinion on it, on this season, which in the end, actually, while it is kind of labeled the burden of truth, I feel this season will be remembered as the burden of sitting at the range and finishing journey. And I'm curious to see what they will say about that and if they will alter that for future seasons. I wouldn't be against it, because actually the structure that they have now for the journey, even with regular play, I'm pretty confident, and not even, for instance, grinding towards the objectives, I feel I could get it done in 1 week or 2 weeks of general playtime. I do, of course, have more playtime than most, but then that would maybe double or triple that for some other people. And they would have gotten just as far. The journey will likely get merged to become one for all characters across the account, and I'm kind of looking forward to that, as well as to do it multiple times, even though at the time being you can do that for the season. It is also very tedious. You're kind of making it's very tedious for yourself. But yeah, if you did enjoy this video or found it informative in some way, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It is always very much appreciated. So I do always appreciate everybody helping out that way. And for future videos, we are going to go do that Umbra build showcase, likely pretty close up. And also I want to do a follow-up video that was kind of on the simple mats, this time on how to visualize stats basically for yourself. And I think that is a very handy tactic to, or a kind of a handy skill to kind of build up for yourself. That way as well, it is very obvious when some people discuss some pieces in a build, just by in your mind kind of tallying off how much bonuses you get, you kind of can already come to a conclusion that will likely be pretty close to to what reality will be. But yeah, those are all coming up. I hope you join me for those. And as always, have a good night.